Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're opening a door, maybe kicking it down a bit, into a really fierce intellectual battle, fought a century ago.
Yeah, a real showdown. And it arguably set the stage for a lot of the cultural debates we're, well, still having.
Absolutely. And this dive is really about the value of, let's say, intellectual clarity, even when defining things clearly makes you unpopular.
Which it often does.
Right. There's that famous quote from Dr. Francis Patton, the Princeton Seminary president. He talked about fighting intellectual battles in a condition of low visibility.
Meaning it's easier, maybe safer, to keep things fuzzy, avoid sharp definitions.
Exactly. But J. Gresham Machen, whose work we're diving into today, he saw that fuzziness, that low visibility, as the core problem.
Right. He wasn't about compromise here. He argued you have to face the logical outcomes because, and this is his quote, the really important things are the things about which men will fight. Clarity is crucial.
So that sets our mission for this deep dive. We're digging into Chapter 1 of Machen's big 1923 book, Christianity and Liberalism.
A hugely influential text.
Definitely. And our goal isn't to, solve this massive debate ourselves. It's more to pull out Machen's argument and present the conflict he saw as sharply and clearly as possible. Use his own standard, basically.
And he starts by drawing a line, like a razor's edge. He says the historic redemptive faith Christianity isn't just fighting atheism out there.
No.
No, it's locked in a desperate struggle with something inside, something he calls a totally diverse type of religious belief.
And this internal challenger, this
Yeah.
other belief system, is what he and others at the time called modernism or liberalism.
Exactly. And he argues it's so dangerous precisely because it uses the same words. It comes dressed in traditional Christian terminology.
Like a Trojan horse, almost.
That's a good way to put it. It talks about God, Christ, salvation, but Macon insists that if you actually look at the definitions being used, the meaning, the substance, is completely different from the traditional faith. It's a total switcheroo under familiar labels.
Okay, let's try to unpack that transformation then. Morekin himself admits the name liberalism is confusing, maybe question-begging was his term.
Right, and he says the movement showed up in lots of different ways, various in its manifestations.
So if it's not like one single doctrine or party platform, what's the common root? What ties this new non-redemptive religion together for him?
For Mohan, it boils down to one fundamental intellectual move: naturalism.
Okay, naturalism. That's a big word. We need to be careful how we use it here, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't talking broad philosophy necessarily.
Exactly. You have to get his specific, almost theological use of the term. He's zeroing in on one key thing.
Which is?
For Mochen, in this context, naturalism means the denial of any entrance of the creative power of God in connection with the origin of Christianity.
The creative power of God, meaning distinct from the ordinary, everyday course of nature.
Precisely. So denying any special, supernatural, miraculous intervention by God to start Christianity.
Wow, okay. That is a huge distinction. If you take out that creative power, you're essentially removing the core historical claims, aren't you?
You absolutely are. Things like the incarnation, God becoming human, or the physical resurrection, even the idea of unique divine revelation, those all require something beyond the ordinary course of nature.
So if God only acts through normal natural processes, then Christianity just becomes, what? Good moral ideas, an ethical system.
Exactly. It becomes a religion about human insight, human effort, maybe noble ideals. It stops being about God breaking into history to save people. It's not supernatural redemption anymore.
Just a set of admirable, maybe very old human teachings.
Right. And for Macon, that single denial rejecting the supernatural origin puts this modern liberal view into a totally different class of religions. It's not just tweaking Christianity.
It's something else entirely, conceptually different, even if it's happening in the same church building.
That's his point. The conflict isn't just internal anymore, it's fundamental. Two different foundations, two different faiths, he would argue.
Okay. Now, this didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Macon's writing, this is the early 1920s, right after the huge upheavals of the 19th century.
Oh, yeah. He talks about the massive changes in just, well, daily life. Modern inventions, industrialism, telegraphs. People really felt like the world was brand new.
And those physical changes were linked to, as he puts it, mighty changes in the human mind. Specifically, the incredible impact of modern science.
Right. And Machen wasn't anti-science in a simple way. He acknowledged its power, the widening of knowledge, the new tools for investigation.
But the key for his argument seems to be how science started moving beyond the lab It wasn't just physics and chemistry anymore.
No, it was expanding its methods. He points directly to the rise of the modern science of history, plus psychology, sociology. These fields were claiming scientific status, too.
And that's where the clash happens, when history itself becomes a science.
Precisely. Because Christianity, as he says, is based squarely on things that happened in the past. It relies on ancient books, the newest written almost 1900 years before his time.
So, if historical events are now fair game for scientific criticism, a religion based on ancient history is suddenly vulnerable in a new way.
Absolutely. That sets up the central question Machen saw his era facing. Whether first-century religion can ever stand in company with 20th century science. Can they coexist?
And he used a really sharp example to make this concrete, didn't he?
Yeah.
About historical proof and Jesus.
Yeah, it's a great thought experiment. He asks, what if the science of history somehow proved that no man called Jesus ever lived and died in the first century? What happens to a regular Christian's faith then?
Well, that person, the simple Christian as he calls him, would immediately say their religion would fall away. Because it's tied to that person, Jesus, actually existing and doing things.
Exactly. Their faith isn't just abstract ideas. It's rooted in specific historical claims found in the New Testament. Facts matter.
Okay, so that's the traditional view, faith linked to history. But the liberal approach, facing this pressure from scientific history, tried to
What?
change the relationship.
It tried to find a compromise, a way to make peace. The liberal theologian, Machen says, tended to concede that, yeah, maybe science does raise problems for the particularities of Christianity.
That particulars being
Things like, the unique divinity of Christ, or salvation happening specifically through his death and resurrection. The miracle stories, the unique claims.
So the liberal move was to say, okay, maybe those specific historical or supernatural bits are problematic for modern minds.
Right. But let's save the general religious principles, the ethics, the feeling of dependence on God, the aspiration towards good. That's the real essence.
And view the specific stories, the miracles, the history, as just temporary packaging. Mere temporary symbols, I think was his phrase for their view.
Yeah, like cultural metaphors from an earlier age, not the core truth itself.
So if the resurrection seems unbelievable today, they'd say, well, it's not about a literal body coming back to life. It's a powerful symbol of hope or spiritual victory. They hoped that concession would win them acceptance in the modern scientific world.
That was the hope. Appease the critics, save the essence. But Machen just slams this approach. He hits it with two main lines of criticism.
Okay, what's the first big problem he sees with this compromise?
First, he says it's actually an unscientific defense. This is critical. Machen argues that just giving things up, being concessive, doesn't actually stop the intellectual conflict.
How so?
Because the really hardcore critics, the modern materialists he saw gaining ground, they weren't just skeptical of miracles, they were skeptical of anything non-physical.
So giving up the resurrection doesn't satisfy someone who thinks consciousness itself is just brain chemistry.
Exactly. Machen's point is that the philosophical idealism, the liberal preacher, retreated to, belief in moral truths, spiritual values, human dignity. That stuff was also under attack from materialism.
So the liberals gave up their unique ground, but didn't actually make peace with the really tough opponents.
Right. They surrendered their strongest defenses, he thought. Machen warned the battle had to be fought on fundamental grounds. You couldn't achieve peace without victory through mere concession. It just looked weak.
Okay, so critique one. The compromise is intellectually weak, doesn't actually satisfy the critics, it's unscientific in its defense. What's the second critique? The theological one.
The second is simpler, maybe even harsher. The outcome is fundamentally unchristian. Meaning, Machen concludes that by giving up everything distinctive about Christianity, the specific person of Christ, the specific acts of redemption, the liberal theologian hasn't updated Christianity. They've abandoned it.
So what's left?
What's left, he says, is only that same indefinite type of religious aspiration which was in the world before Christianity came upon the scene. Vague spirituality, general ethics.
Wow. So instead of making Christianity modern, they accidentally reverted to something like pre-Christian paganism or just, basic ethical humanism.
That's exactly his argument. He uses this striking image. They fled in needless panic into the open plains of a vague natural religion, tried to save the faith, ended up losing it entirely.
This is where Machen makes a really interesting turn, I think. He connects this theological fight directly to the state of modern culture itself.
Yes, it's a fascinating pivot. He basically challenges the premise that modern automatically means better.
Right. He asks, why should we listen to the modern critics demanding we water down our faith when their modern world, despite all its gadgets, seems spiritually and culturally, well, worse?
It's a bold move. He's questioning the authority of modernity to judge religion. If the 20th century's supposed enlightenment isn't producing great culture, maybe its critique of religion isn't trustworthy either.
What evidence does he point to for this kind of spiritual bankruptcy in the modern world?
He talks about an unprecedented decline in literature and art. He looks around and says, where are the great poets, the great painters responding to this new age?
And the art that is being made.
He finds it either largely imitative of the past or just bizarre. And he links this directly to a shift in education towards a purely utilitarian education. One focused only on practical skills, physical well-being, job training, neglecting the higher things, the soul, the humanities.
A drab utilitarianism, he calls it, just focused on the material.
And this utilitarian focus, he warns, has another dangerous consequence, a loss of liberty.
How does utilitarianism lead to less freedom?
He saw modern society driven by efficiency and this idea of forced welfare, increasingly limiting the realm of freedom for the individual man, standardization, regulation.
Things designed for the common good, but maybe crushing individual choice.
That's his fear. He argues that real personality, true human flourishing, only develops where there's individual choice and liberty. And that space was shrinking, squeezed by this materialistic, collectivist mindset.
You can really feel his anxiety about the state becoming this overwhelming force dictating uniformity.
Yes, a kind of paternalism that decides what's best for everyone, materially, and then imposes it. And he wasn't just talking theory. He pointed to actual laws being passed.
Right. This is where it gets very concrete. He gives examples from the early 1920s showing this trend, especially in education, which he saw as the key battleground for minds.
Yeah, the details are quite striking. He mentions the Nebraska Law of 1919. What did that do?
It basically banned teaching any foreign language in any school, public or private, before the 9th grade. And he adds, with some bite, apparently not even Latin or Greek.
Which to him was madness. How can you have higher learning, connect with the past with great literature or philosophy if you choke off languages? He saw as deliberately creating arrested development, keeping minds shallow.
Forcing uniformity again. But then came the Oregon Law, which was even more direct.
The Oregon Law of 1922. This one was passed by popular vote, incredibly.
And it required all children between certain ages to attend public schools, period.
Effectively wiping out private schools, Christian schools, any alternative in those crucial early grades.
That, for Machen, was the nightmare scenario, wasn't it? Total state monopoly over education.
Absolutely. He called a monopolistic public school system the most perfect instrument of tyranny which has yet been devised. Strong words.
Why so terrifying to him?
Because it allows the state, guided by that same utilitarian, potentially materialistic worldview, to shape every child's mind, to crush any higher aspirations, any non-state approved thinking right from the start.
His ultimate fear, it sounds like, was America becoming this single, homogenized, conformist culture. A giant Main Street, as he put it.
Yeah, where individual liberty, deep thought, spiritual concerns, they all get sacrificed for standardized, state-managed material comfort. And the root, for him, was the same naturalistic thinking that undermines specific Christian doctrines.
It's all connected, the theological concessions and the cultural flattening.
That's the threat he traces. Vagueness, compromise, losing specificity, whether in belief or in life, leads to weakness, and eventually, he feared tyranny. The fight for doctrine was a fight for liberty.
So looking back at Machen's crossroads moment, he really saw two distinct paths. One was this, well, weak, concessive modernism trying to blend in.
Trying to buy peace by giving up the core claims. Yeah.
And the other path
was a return, a recovery of the specific supernatural message of divine grace. He genuinely seemed to believe that rediscovering that message could ignite a new reformation.
And actually restore light and freedom to mankind, not just save the church.
That was the hope. His strategy against liberalism was clear. Attack it on two fronts. Argue that it's one, unchristian, it ditched the core message. And two, it's unscientific, its compromises didn't even work intellectually against materialism. He believed that only by defending the specific, historical, supernatural claims of the real city of God could you actually stand firm against modern unbelief and maybe revitalize culture.
It really forces you to think about how much rests on definitions, on specificity. These intellectual fights over words can have huge, real-world consequences.
They really can. And it leaves us, I think, with Machen's core challenge. It kind of echoes across the century. He said, Vastly more important than all questions with regard to methods of preaching
Yeah.
is the root question as to what it is that shall be preached. Content over style, substance over technique. What do you actually believe?
And what are you willing to define clearly, even if it's not popular? We saw Macon's view trying to make convictions palatable often makes them vague. And vagueness for him was the enemy of strength.
Right. So the question he leaves hanging for us, for you listening, might be, in your own life, what are the core convictions you hold? Are they specific? Are they clear? Are they things you'd actually contend for, even if they seem, unmodern or out of step?
That's the kind of clarity Macon demanded. Something to think about.